Ruth Whittaker, welcome. You will tell us how the Scottish policy for recognition of prior learning is being used in practice.
Thank you. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here and to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing in Scotland for quite a few years now around RPL. I'm going to very briefly outline the national context for development in terms of policy and practice, and then I'll briefly go on to summarise the approach we've taken at my own university, Glasgow Caledonian University, and then to share with you some of my reflections on that, which actually, as I've sat through the presentations, pretty much echo what we've heard, but it's always useful to get a different national context, I suppose. So, the SCQF is our national qualifications framework, and Scotland's RPL story certainly didn't begin with its introduction in 2001 as Scotland's lifelong learning framework, but that and the development of national SCQF RPL guidelines in 2003 and 2005 certainly acted as a key stimulus and driver for RPL development across educational sectors in Scotland, not just within formal education providers like universities, but within the community and within the workplace. Because the guidelines were cross-sectoral, weren't restricted to universities, for example, we actually took a much broader definition and purpose of RPL, and that's resulted from the scoping and development work that I undertook in developing the guidelines. We recognise the formally, if you like, the transformative, formative dimension of RPL. So we recognise the value of RPL not just for enabling learners to gain entry to or credit within programmes of study, say at university, but the value of the process itself as a learning process in terms of supporting confidence building, helping transitions between informal and non-formal learning and formal learning, helping to plan educational and career pathways. Why is RPL important? I guess in terms of European discourse, we've heard a lot about that, and national discourse reflected here within our speakers, but for the same, for us, very much aligned to widening participation, workforce development, skills utilisation, economic growth. The policy focus in Scotland at the moment is very much around fair access, and by that we mean that we're trying to close the educational attainment gap between people from the most disadvantaged areas and those from the least. They're very much a focus on young people and smoother and more flexible learner journeys. The term efficiency happens a lot within policy discourse, and by that we mean no duplication of learning, so unnecessary duplication of learning at SCQF levels. The government and the higher education sector have invested a lot in something we call articulation. This is, I think, pretty much a uniquely Scottish term to describe, because when I say this in other national context, what is that? Basically, it's enabling students who are at college, who are doing vocational qualifications at higher level, higher national qualifications, to progress directly into second and third year of degree programmes. So a form of RPL, credit transfer. We are a key player in this. We represent a quarter of all the articulation activity in Scotland, and about 30% of our students come into the second and third year of degree programmes on the basis of a higher national qualification from college. In terms of RPL, while the processes themselves can indeed be empowering, be transformative, be a hugely positive experience, quite often the practices that we have developed to support RPL act as a very barrier to the learners we're seeking to target. So within Scotland, there's been quite a substantial programme of work to try and develop more accessible and streamlined processes of RPL to realise its potential. So the QAA, the Quality Assurance Agency in Scotland, set up a higher education RPL network, and I chaired that during its lifetime, and from 2010 has been embarked on a national programme of work to really address this issue. And this has culminated in a national RPL framework for higher education with supporting resources for universities. And that's been quite interesting because that's obviously aligned to the SCQF RPL guidelines. It's aligned to our Quality Assurance Agency National Code of Practice for Higher Education. There is now a chapter on RPL for the first time. which is that kind of mandatory element, if you like, in terms of engagement now. And it's very much embedded within quality, which is an issue that's been echoed today, over the last couple of days here, the importance of that dimension. And what that's meant is that we are assuring, therefore, a similarity across different institutions in terms of the core principles about RPL, but also allowing for difference, recognizing institutional autonomy in terms of the way we manage the process and in terms of how much credit you can gain, how much fees you can charge. We have developed a set of enablers, institutional enablers, and obviously I appreciate you can't really see that, it's very small writing, but I provided links to the documents at the end, so you'll be able to go and look at that in more detail. But this really sets out the core elements of an effective institutional approach, and this really underpins the approach we've taken at GCU. So Glasgow Caledonian University is the university for the common good. And as part of that, we have a very strong focus on widening access, enabling learners to access higher education and benefit and progress successfully, regardless of their background or prior educational experience. So clearly RPL is a key part of that commitment. We recognise 2 forms of RPL at Glasgow Caledonian University, recognising prior certificated learning, so credit transfer, so enabling people to gain entry or credit on the basis of their previously gained qualifications or partly achieved qualifications, and recognition of prior informal learning, where we support an assessment process leading to the awarding of credit, and again, to enable people to gain entry to university or credit within programs. We have a university policy, but we have a devolved system. So while we have a university policy that sets out the key roles, processes, and principles of RPL, we devolve the management of the process to our academic schools. And we do that deliberately because we want to mainstream it within our normal admissions, assessment, and quality assurance processes. So the schools have developed their own processes for managing the RPL system, but all have to align and be in line with, if you like, the regulations set out in the RPL policy itself. You cannot read that, even with your best eyesight. But again, obviously, it's really just to kind of signal to you that we have a flow chart, and you can access that in the policy document that there's a link to. I think it's really trying to indicate that we, again, in common with some of the ideas that have emerged so far, we have a single system, but recognizing that if you're trying to apply for entry or credit on the basis of your prior certificated learning, you follow a more simplified process, a very mainstreamed, well-trodden pathway managed by our central admissions team who would liaise with the program that you're seeking entry or credit to say, is this learning, this credited learning, comparable to the learning that you would be seeking to achieve in the program? And if the answer is yes, then the student can come onto the program either as an alternative to the traditional entry qualifications, or indeed to get advanced standing within the program. If a learner is seeking to gain recognition for their prior experiential or prior informal learning, then they have to undertake a supported process where they are then gathering evidence of that learning in a format that's agreed and present that for assessment and recognition. So the flowchart just indicates the various steps a learner would take depending on what they were seeking to achieve. There are 3 broad stages, and again, this is replicating what we've even heard just this morning from Mia in terms of guidance, support, and recognition. We have developed within one of our schools, our health and life sciences, who've been engaged in RPL for years, hugely successful. It's where the most activity happens. And they have a school RPL coordinator who's actually an administrator who manages the entire workflow from inquiry through to identifying support, assessment, fee processing, recognition, recording of claims, and entering onto the student's record, and liaises is a central point of contact within the school for academic staff and for the applicants, and it's a really effective process. It has also meant that we have much more robust mechanisms now for recording activity and pushing the process through and trying to overcome some of the inevitable hurdles that might face a learner as they're working through the system of RPL when we're looking at prior informal learning, which is a demanding and process, as we've heard, in terms of identifying your learning, gathering evidence, and presenting that in a format which can be assessed. And again, there's more information about this in the documents that I've provided a link to. Over the years, we've developed a wider range of evidence-gathering mechanisms as we've grown in confidence in terms of the RPL process. increasing use of technology and e-portfolios as well. I would say that mostly claims will be uploaded to the portal, if you like. Mostly would be considered a portfolio, more commonly an e-portfolio with a reflective account. But again, we're trying to encourage more use of direct evidence in terms of workplace artifacts, and to broaden out our concept of how we might manage that process through more innovative forms of assessment, which won't necessarily be the forms of assessment that are used in the program for which the learners are seeking credit. And I'll come on to that later. We've developed a set of guides for staff and for students around RPL to support the policy, and we've developed a set of CPD workshops and seminars for staff as well, because as has been echoed before, that training, that confidence in using the process is absolutely crucial. So moving on to my reflections. In terms of levels of RPL activity, I've already indicated that credit transfer, articulation as a form of credit transfer, is well established, is extensive, and not only in terms of managing that through the normal admissions process, but also we recognise the need to provide well-established transition and progression support processes for learners that are entering directly into the later stages of degree programmes. So that's all good. We have significant activity in our School of Health and Life Sciences, which has developed this well-coordinated and robust process for managing the RPL activity within the school. And because of the increasing interest in the other schools that we have, academic schools that we have, they're going to emulate this model, which is great. The other area of work of the university which extensively uses RPL is our School for Work-Based Education, which develops bespoke work-based learning programs with employers. We have over 550 work-based learners within the UK and in South Africa. And RPL is just an absolutely normal part of developing that learning program. So again, well-established processes there. And we're just about to embark on our first graduate level apprenticeships, which is a new development in Scotland. We have degree apprenticeships in England, which are a bit further advanced, which enables learners to access a degree through the workplace rather than coming into university, a work-based learning program. And RPL would be a key dimension of that. So moving on to the more challenging areas. I really tried to think about the 4 key areas where I feel that even though we have a well-established process, we have a clear commitment, though not funding, as everyone has, there is no explicit funding, and in fact the funding mechanism in Scotland actually works against RPL. These are the 4 key areas in terms of awareness raising. So while we have the process, we have the tools, we have the growing confidence in using it, there is still not a huge amount of activity, and that's because there isn't necessarily a great awareness or understanding still even of the potential that RPL can have. So for potential learners, potential applicants. So I do think we need to be much more proactive about that. In terms of our target groups, employees are an obvious target group, and that works very effectively, but we are increasingly now starting to look at the issues around refugees and migrants, and what are the particular barriers in our admissions and RPL processes to this group of learners, which is why this conference has been incredibly useful and interesting for me. The biggest area, though, I think is around the process, and this reflects some of the discussion that we've had, particularly actually the keynote that we had from Christina about the Lisbon Recognition Convention. And it tells me how we frame the learning that we're seeking to recognise and accredit. And you have to take a step back, I think, to think about what is the purpose of RPL. Its purpose is to enable someone to demonstrate that they have the requisite knowledge, skills, and understanding to come onto a programme at university and progress and succeed. And the way we traditionally do that in the UK is to require learners to match the outcomes of their informal learning to the learning outcomes of the modules that they're seeking credit against. Now, in theory, that's all good, because we know that learning outcomes are a key enabler for RPL, absolutely. The idea that learning, wherever it occurs, however it occurs, can be assessed and recognised. But in reality, the learning outcomes within modules are often and usually predicated on a formal learning delivery model. So learning that is unitised and sequential and generalised before it becomes specialised, whereas informal learning is highly contextualised, unstructured and non-unitised. So we're asking learners who lack probably a lot of confidence anyway to try and convert or distort their learning from their experience into a form that's understandable, if you like, by the academy. almost like fitting, as we use that square peg in a round hole. And it's no wonder that these processes and these practices can act as huge barriers. And it's also no wonder that we say that we value informal learning. There is a parity of esteem, but our practices ourselves appear to devalue it. And that was kind of reflected, I think, in the experiences that we heard from Fiona and Selma yesterday as well, absolutely. So I think there is a need to look beyond, to look critically at the way we design our curriculums, the way we articulate our learning outcomes, and we are looking at ways in which we might use, as Katrina has suggested, sort of the level descriptors almost of our national qualifications framework to contextualize them or program higher level articulation of learning outcomes rather than the subject module learning outcomes where we're never going to get an exact match. Never going to do that. So we need to really challenge that. And transition issues as well, I would say, are crucial because RPL applicants are an invisible group. So while we have well-established support mechanisms for students coming in from college, articulating through, once a person makes an RPL claim, they're just students and they're not accessing the same level of support. And for refugees, particularly, they're counted as home students and don't get to access international student support as well when they face many of the same issues, particularly around language. And I am finishing, I'm sensing the tension here. And in terms of monitoring, again, has been reflected, we need to really increase the robustness of our evidence base, which we've achieved a lot in, but we need to do more, and ensure greater consistency and transparency. And a lot of that is about sharing of practice and peer learning amongst academic staff. Finally, I wanted just to alert you to this document, which I think is probably pretty similar to many other documents that have been shared in this conference. This is Scotland's, University of Scotland's guidance to universities on how to improve access and guidance for refugees and migrants as part of our broader New Scot strategy within Scotland. And it's interesting, within that, RPL is highlighted as a key mechanism for addressing some of those access and engagement barriers for refugees. This is the link to all of these documents are contained here, and I appreciate I have really gone quickly through that, and I'm very happy to engage with any of you in discussion either later or over lunch about any of that. And I thank you very much and look forward to the discussion.